Ah, all right, there. Recording
We're starting.
started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We're starting, everyone. All right. What? So, welcome to episode 1 of the Ben and Ryan Show.
Whatever this is, we're doing it. We're doing it live.
Live-ish. Yeah, it says recording, so it's. Oh, people, I feel bad for you guys listening to this.
In our excuse, or in our defense, it is later in the afternoon. We're that post-lunch, not
Yeah.
caffeine slump. So.
And for so some behind the scenes, today is like a day before or 2 days, depending on whenever it hits, for Milton hitting. So I have been prepping for the hurricane. I'm down in Florida myself, so hopefully everything's gonna be okay. So we'll know. You guys will know when you're listening to this.
What's crazy to me is that for those who aren't aware, hurricane naming is alphabetical. So we had Hurricane Helene, and I say we, the royal we. I'm actually up in Northeast, so I get win. That's it. But Helene, and this is what now, Milton?
Milton.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of letters in between in just the span of a week. I mean, this is a peak hurricane season down south.
And they were pretty big actually, but no one knows because they fizzled out in the middle of the ocean.
Small,
but I think they got to like 4s and 5s.
Yeah, it is. It's bonkers.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, Ben and I, we've been chatting and we decided, you know what? Let's get together and do a podcast about life.
Absolutely.
So there's not necessarily a topic, although we kind of share passion for the ColdFusion community, and a lot of our topics may be around that. But you're going to get some of our life, some of just what happens in business, what happens in personal, and just kind of an inner look at what's going on for us. And hopefully you relate and you can kind of be like, hey, you know what? I'm going through that too. Or that's interesting stuff. And you take that away from it. But we'll see where this goes.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So I think one of the things that I do with my kids every night at dinner is we talk about, okay, hey, what was your favorite part of the week or the day? So we're going to do these weekly, probably. Yeah, we don't know. We're playing it by ear. So Ben, let's just say we do this weekly.
Yeah.
Ben, but hopefully you guys find this funny too. If not, we're just laughing. I mean, this is therapeutic for us. So Ben, what was your favorite part of last week?
Of last week, I think I'd have to say that the CF Summit West was my favorite part.
What?
Crazy, right? Small world.
Oh man. Yeah, that was a great conference.
I enjoyed the dry heat of the Southwest.
Yeah, it's an oven when you walk outside.
Right.
So CF Adobe ColdFusion Summit, the West Coast version, out in Vegas every year, for better or for worse, Vegas. Yeah. So you started first. You said yes. I had a great time. I love people. One of the reasons why I went out there. So Ben, what was your favorite part of that show or of the summit?
I think it was definitely meeting people, talking to people. I've been going to ColdFusion conferences, I mean, probably for the last 15-ish years. And I'm used to
you
meeting...
were on a hiatus, though.
Yeah. Well, COVID and
from the pictures on your blog that are dated not in like this decade.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, going back. And I'm used to meeting a lot of the same people. And what I was kind of blown away by CF Summit West was just how many new faces I saw. And I don't know if this is people who just didn't always come to the East Coast, which is where I've been to a lot of conferences, but it was just really, really great. I mean, just looking back at the photos I was able to take, and I know this because I have to enter a database record for all of the people that I meet so that I can cross-correlate on the website. I think Luis Mayano was maybe the only, and Emily Myers were the only 2 records that I already had in the database. Every other photo I had was with someone that I had either never met before or I had never had a photo with. So that was just, I don't know, very refreshing to me. I was very excited to meet a bunch of new people.
I mean, so I've been to a couple CF summits, the East, West, and I will say that I've never seen a celebrity like Ben when he walked there. I mean, because Ben's thing is taking pictures with people. There was like lines to get your picture taken with Ben. I mean, it's like he was a Disney character. He was like the Disney princess, or Mickey Mouse. Maybe not Mickey Mouse, but he was the Mickey Mouse of the summit. I mean, he's our little celebrity there.
It's great, and I'll tell you, because I'm actually quite an introverted person normally. It's a muscle that I have to exercise when I'm meeting people. Asking for a photo on my part is actually quite a courageous act. I have to psych myself up to do it because it makes me extremely nervous. There's the logistics of who's going to hold the phone. Can we find somebody?
Oh, yeah.
Is the quality? I feel like there's a quality control issue. I want to make sure that I get a good photo with people. I make sure that I get a good, a photo that people enjoy seeing of themselves. There's a lot of pressure.
How do you handle it? Because you want your copy, but I mean, did you have to trade off phones? Because I mean, a lot of people wanted their own copy with you also.
Yeah, so there was a lot of doubling down. There was a lot of doubling down on, take it with this phone, now take it with that phone. In an ideal world, if I could be completely narcissistic for 1 second, I would actually have someone come with me to the conference, like a real photographer who like actually knows how to take a photo. And if I could just like side tangent for 1 second on a huge gripe of mine, for years, the Apple industrial complex has talked about how great the Apple iPhone cameras are. And these are just as good as every other camera and the quality is amazing. I feel like I have a Canon point and click digital camera with a zoom lens that's like 15 years old. And when I look at the photos that it takes, I feel like they're better than the modern iPhone photos. It's a different, maybe it should be caveated. It's like the iPhone for a phone camera is really great. But even just looking at my photos versus, say, I got a couple from someone who was there with like an actual DSL. Clearly, I'm not a photography guy, but someone with a real lens. And you look at those and you're like, oh my God, it's a night and day difference. I mean, to say that these are comparable camera technologies in any way is just insane. But not to get too sidetracked there, but I just had a tremendous time, and I loved meeting everyone. It was physically and mentally exhausting. It's like it takes every emotional token that I have in my little mental bank when I'm dealing with people in a good way. But
because I'm sure there's a lot of introverts listening, watching to this. How do you get the energy? Because I mean, as an extrovert, I draw on the crowds and it gives me the energy. But you seem to have the energy when you're there. What do you mentioned psych yourself up for it? What do you actually do to psych yourself up for it?
I think once I'm engaged in a conversation, the conversation itself is very energizing. Connecting with people is energizing. It's part of what makes being a human exciting. It's the getting into the conversation that is terrifying and exhausting. And part of what I do is I just accept the fact that I'm a weirdo and everyone else is probably kind of a weirdo also. So I just try to find some other weirdos to go talk to. And I'll tell you, one of the nice things, I can't remember who said this, maybe it was Mark Takata, someone in the opening keynote made a point to say, you're not necessarily here to see the people you've met before. You're here to meet new people. And so when you walk into a session room or you walk into a meal, find the tables that have people you don't recognize and go sit at them. And I found that one to be really nice that they actually made that vocal, but then also from a strategy standpoint, I find that to be super effective. I would try to walk into the cafeteria, the central lunch area, and I would just look for a table with someone who was either sitting by themselves or, 2 or 3 people who I just didn't recognize. And I would just sit with them and try to start up a conversation. And I think leaning into the idea that we're all sort of struggling with the same social barriers and just being okay with that. That's kind of how I've been psyching myself up for it.
It's interesting. So and we're kind of drawing parallels. We're going in a weird direction on the show.
Welcome to my world.
But I was talking to my daughter, and I forget where I saw like a quote about this, but it was a story about somebody who they thought that they were afraid to talk to somebody because they're like, oh, this person's going to think I'm this way. And so they met and they didn't engage with them because they're like, oh no, I'm intimidated by them. And later on, they talked to that person and they're like, oh, I didn't engage with you because I thought I was intimidated by you. So both people, they ended up not talking because they thought that they were intimidated by the other person, and they come to find out that they're both just in the same boat. And it kind of echoes what you were talking about. It's like, hey, we're all weirdos.
Yeah, absolutely.
In our own way. Just know that other person is as scared as you are, and just go up there and say hi, or engage in the conversation, or find some common ground.
Yeah, and if I can be honest, the fact that I am in this smaller community, somewhat well known, I think makes it a lot easier for me, because part of me has faith that I'm going to sit down with someone, and even if I don't recognize them, there's a chance that they will recognize me, and that kind of adds a kind of a social lubricant to the getting the conversation started. So that's pretty nice. If I were to go to, say, like a PHP conference where I really didn't know anyone and people really didn't know me, it would be the same exact tactic, but I would definitely feel a lot more nervous, I think, going into that. Hey, I'm Ben. Where are you all from? Check out this weather.
I guess in a dev conference, you probably can't just go sports because they're like, oh.
Yeah. I don't know anything about sports.
I don't want to say that all developers don't like sports or not into sports, but yeah, it is intimidating even as an extrovert. So the extrovert doesn't necessarily isn't always outgoing, although I have that trait. Mm-hmm. But you get your energy from the crowds. Yeah. So even the extrovert can be nervous talking to people. So I think everyone listening, we're all just nervous. Just sometimes just make that move.
And I'll tell you, there is something very nice about the structure of a conference with sessions. I've talked to people in the past who they go to a conference and they literally don't attend any sessions. For them, it's just the quote unquote hallway track the entire time. And for those listening who aren't familiar with that phrase, that's basically the conference that takes place in the hallway as opposed to during the presentations. It's just the meeting people and the networking. For me, the sessions almost become this safe haven that I can go out and I can network and talk to people for 20 minutes. And it's great, but it's exhausting. And then I can go into a session and it's this safe space I know for the next 40 minutes, I can sit there and kind of let my battery recharge. I mean, I enjoy the sessions also. I find learning about stuff to be very fascinating, but it is also a emotional recharge. And then the next, tea, coffee, networking, 20-minute gap. I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to go again. But for me, that cadence to the networking presentation, that's very much part of my strategy for success in being around so many people in a way that I'm not particularly comfortable doing.
It's interesting. Come from a vendor perspective, being out in the booth and being the extrovert to draw energy from the crowd. Yeah, I'm the opposite. Like when the sessions are out there, no one's out in the booth area generally. Yeah. Traffic. I'm like, oh man, 40 minutes until I get my battery recharged by people coming out and talking to me.
I feel like it's like we need some sort of tapping in situation.
Exactly.
So did you get to attend any of the sessions, or were you actually at the booth the entire time?
I got to attend. I mean, I presented, so I presented my session. They kind of require that. But the only other one I got to attend was Mark Takata. Mm-hmm. He did one on kind of how to be an evangelist, and I wanted to kind of see that because I think in the CF community we have to kind of prop up CF and get people talking. It was amazing seeing Brian Sappy talk about the education. I think it's Fusion Code Camp. If anyone's looking it up,
that was really great.
For anyone listening, find Brian Sappy. He's online. I think it's Fusion Code Camp. Whatever you can do to help, if you want to do it in your area, hit him up. I think it's great to kind of he's educating younger students in ColdFusion. I think it's a great way to kind of get the next generation thinking about it. and maybe the phase one of getting it to high schools or something. We'll be doing it at the junior high level. So definitely find him. But yeah, I went to Mark's, and so for me, I mean, being in one session, that was my favorite, and it was one I wanted to see because of things.
Mm-hmm.
How about you? Well, what was your favorite? Well, you got to see a bunch of sessions. What was your favorite?
I really enjoyed Justin Scott did a presentation on cryptography. Cryptography has always been something I have to do at work in a lightweight way, but it's never something I have a tremendous amount of confidence. Am I doing the right thing? So seeing him walk through the various password hashing strategies and the data encryption, decryption strategies, and which algorithms to use and what kind of key lengths to use. It was really good. I mean, he went pretty low level on some of the like blockchain cipher stuff, which
that'd be a great one. So
yeah,
was that because of the one of the recent CF updates require changing up so the default, I think it's the default encryption. They change it up for different reasons. They'll use different encryption techniques.
Yeah, I think he was saying in his presentation that both the default algorithm for hashing, which I think was previously MD5, has now become SHA-1, and then I think the default algorithm for encrypting was CFMX compat. I don't know what that maps to, but apparently it's not a strong encryption algorithm. And I think I can't remember what he says, like AES. Now maybe I can't quite remember. Okay. That's this is again, it's like I understand encryption at a very high level, but
yeah. And I probably should know this because I did a podcast with Charlie Earhart, and we talked about this update specifically. So if you're listening, find the Xbyte Cloud on YouTube. Find that one, and I believe we go into what are the now defaults. But I'm not big into that, so it didn't sit in my head. But yeah, and great, timely, and interesting with Justin Scott to go into that, and great to be also kind of because the changes in the update, people are now thinking about that more.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've had some background nervousness about for a couple of years now is this whole concept of quantum computing. And if you ask me what quantum computing is, I would not be able to tell you, even in the slightest, other than people will say things like, oh, once quantum computing comes around, all encryption is dead.
Yeah.
And he did mention in passing that I think if you use SHA, what's it like? If you use SHA-1 hashing with like a 256 bit or was a 128 bit key, that it will be resistant to quantum computing.
Really?
I mean, don't take my word for which thing is which, but he did mention that it's not the end of the world. So I was pleased to hear that.
All right. So disclaimer: if you are listening, watching, and you do use that encryption mechanism, and you are hacked by someone with quantum computer, then not Xbyte.
we are just making this up as we go. None of us are lawyers.
So hit up Justin. He will tell you.
It's his fault.
Hit up Justin Scott. But yeah, and Ben, you were supposed to agree with me on Mark's being a session of your favorite, and we were going to do this big thing.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't want to steal your thunder, right? Mark Takata, I was there. It was a fantastic presentation. He presented it super well, and not just in a abstract way. That was, I think, the most powerful part of this. Everyone in the
so I had slides.
Yes, please. Okay.
That's why I was giving Ben a hard time, because we were talking ahead of time. We added all these slides to the and he's like, oh yeah, Justin Scott's, but no.
Slides one time, hit it.
All right. So interesting thing here. So when for this one, for us, we talked to people a lot about, okay, hey, for hosting, we're going to host you in CF, but we're not just CF. We knew anything with hosting. So if you do want to change, and we talk to people, we talk to our partners about how they're engaging in conversations with people. And one of our partners is reminisce. they were at the show. We talked to them about this very point about, okay, hey, does it make sense to kind of change what you're doing? And this could be changing up CF, or people who look to say, hey, look, we're in the we're on-prem now. Should we move to the cloud, or should we move to AWS Azure? All these kind of, it's the same concept. Should you burn down the house, or should you pick and choose different things, or should you just kind of stick with what you have?
Yep.
And the refactoring, or leaving some pieces of it. So a lot of times people, and I have these conversations with people on the CF side of things, is like, okay, the reason why people think they want to move off CF is because of the presentation side of things. And you can change the presentation piece and use one of the modern frameworks for your presentation of your app, or your page, of your site, and still keep the core CF doing the back-end processing, doing your middle tier business logic, and all that can reside there. And that'll save you a lot from this whole idea of burning down the house. And so this is a slide from Mark's presentation that we went into this. And the staffing, for those who weren't at the show, an interesting point was brought up in the keynote. I think the company was BIS. They were talking about how, I think hopefully I correctly attribute it to them, but they were talking about how there's like a moat around their developers, because for better or for worse, there's not a lot of people recruiting CF developers.
Right.
So if you were doing, let's say, a PHP or a C#, or Angular, any of these new Swift, any of these new types, you're going to get a lot more people trying to steal those developers, and you're going to have to be battling to keep your developers. You should do that anyway, even for CF. I don't want to say don't pay your. I'm going to get attacked now. Not saying don't pay your CF developers, but for them, there was a moat around that, and that was a plus for them. But you definitely should pay your developers what they're worth, I think, for any employees.
Plus,
go ahead.
One of the other points that I think Mark was making at a different point in his presentation was that combating this myth that ColdFusion is this old, outdated language. And the reality is, if you look at quote unquote modern ColdFusion today, it looks and feels and behaves very similarly to all of the other modern languages, whether JavaScript or I don't know, not a language guy, but it's not this antiquated way of putting code together. It's very much in line with C# and JavaScript and whichever modern language you have, Golang. I mean, they all have their own particularities, but it's all methods and objects and complex data structures and simple data types. And this idea that there's some mythical old school way of thinking about ColdFusion, it's just not true. And anyone who can do JavaScript could step into a ColdFusion role and train up on it, but it would not be a completely new outlook on life. It's okay, I see how to translate the JavaScript into ColdFusion. I see where you have to add certain things and take away other things. It's very much a modern language.
Yeah, I know of 3 people who had experienced object-oriented programmers, and they took the class, and with minimal studying beforehand, they were able to pass it doing CF code on the test, because of the fact that it's very easy to learn. Mm-hmm. and for that rapid application development, that's why people like it. Is like, hey, this is familiar. I can do things a lot faster. I don't have to do 8 lines of code to get things done. I can do just 2 to get my data or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It has I've been doing it for a long time, and a big part of that is because it's a very enjoyable language. There's a lot to really love about it.
If anyone is listening and watching, and you do want assistance in doing any kind of a actual financial analysis of, okay, should I make the move to either do off of CF, or should I do cloud to on-prem, or on-prem to cloud, or really cloud to on-prem, either way, or even to AWS, let me know. Actually, I did part of my presentation was
Mhm.
on how to do that financial analysis, or my session there. So I'll be glad to kind of assist any way I can for that. Now, Ben, interesting. We were talking ahead of time. You have your own personal story of this, as far as, hey,
Oh yeah.
um, and you guys made a decision to try a rewrite. How? And I can tell by that tone, it doesn't sound like it went well.
It did not go well. So unfortunately, our team got swept up in the mythos around ColdFusion being an outdated language, and the powers that be decided that it was the right time to try and rebuild our product in more quote unquote modern languages of Node.js and Golang. And it was pitched to the CTO at the time as being an effort that would take maybe somewhere in the ballpark of 3 to 6 months. And you have to keep in mind that this was the rebuilding of a product that had already been live for 5, 6, 7 years. So people believe that we could rebuild it in just a couple of months. And that 3 to 6 months of the rebuild ended up at probably around 4.5 years. They decided that it was never going to complete. And we ended up just having two platforms exist side by side for the rest of the company's history.
Wow.
Yeah. So it poses a rewrite poses all sorts of problems, both technical problems like how do you have users in both systems at the same time?
Yeah.
And do we share databases? Do we create new databases? How do we actually apply the updates? Then there's also company and planning problems. Like we have two platforms now. So what happens to feature development in the quote unquote legacy platform? Can we respond to user requests, or does that create parity issues between the new platforms? And do we have to, every time we make a fix in the legacy platform, do we have to replicate that fix in the modern, quote unquote, modern platform? Or do we have to have a meeting about whether or not that should be copied over? Or if we make changes in the modern platform, do we backport them into the legacy platform? It's all kinds of, it ends up becoming not just a game of how do we satisfy the customer, it becomes a game of politics internally and planning. And it's just very unfortunate that we ended up going that direction.
So back years before my time at Xbyte, I spent a lot of time in product management for ERP companies, and
ERP being what for the listener?
enterprise resource planning. So like business software.
Okay.
So like the your equivalent of like a QuickBooks, or the higher end QuickBooks, like a NetSuite. Acumatica is another ERP type company. About it was years before it was more on prem. They're all kind of SaaS and cloud based at this point. But in doing so, we would always pull like our customers and say, okay, hey, what do you want us to do? And we would say, okay, hey, do you want us to strengthen the platform and do different things to kind of maybe help a little bit on performance, or do you want these shiny new features?
Mm-hmm.
And every time we put out that survey, it was like shiny new features. And it's like, hey guys, so I think a lot of times companies don't realize that, okay, yes, they may want something for their own purposes, but let's say 6 months or a year of not developing features, how fast are you able to make that up on, let's say, a modern platform?
Right.
So are you going to make that up in another 6 or 12 months of now developing new stuff on the modern platform to catch up to your competitors who've used that time to surpass you on a feature set? So you really have to think through that. Okay, it's not just the fact that you're moving to a platform. It's like all the things you're going to miss out on during that time period if you miss your mark. What's that going to happen? So you really need to think through that risk, the risk reward, the ROI on that.
And I think it's important that you don't allow too many layers of abstraction between you and the customer. I mean, obviously, we can't all have direct contact with the customer. That's not a scalable way to run a company, most likely. But when you're making these kinds of decisions, you always have to sort of reframe it in what does the customer want. And I think a big part of where we made a misstep as a company is the people who were ultimately making the large decisions I think we're several layers of management and reporting and support away from the people who are actually asking for feature development. So you lose a sense of the gravity of your situation and the gravity of the decisions you're about to make.
So, so you mentioned that it took 4 years to do that. What were some of the things you've learned from that? So maybe you can, maybe it does make sense for someone to do a refactor for, let's say they're in PHP and they want to refactor to ColdFusion. Like, hey, look, I heard a lot of great things about the CF. I want to move to that. What experiences can you help people learn from that can help them do their refactoring project and make it a success and not have it take 4 years?
Yeah, I think about two different things, two main callouts. One, there's this notion of the strangler pattern in software design. It's I think maybe Martin Fowler coined it. It's based on the strangler fig tree, which apparently is a tree that grows up and around other trees, and then it basically strangles, takes all the light, and I think it takes water away from the tree, and it eventually kills the tree, and you're left with this shell. And that's kind of how you want to think about building software, as I see it, in this kind of a case where you don't want to rebuild the whole thing. You build little parts of it at a time, and then you slowly strangle the original application, so that you can siphon off little pieces of functionality piece by piece. And that way, I think it gives you an opportunity to, instead of being focused on the grandness of the whole rewrite, you can focus on what is the next highest priority thing that would be worth rewriting. And when you have to think about doing it in this incremental fashion, it forces you to think about the value add of the rewrite. What is going to be the most value add for the company? What is going to be the most value add for the customer? And that forces you to think about it in a very concrete way. It's not just a rewriting stuff is good, ColdFusion is bad, Golang is good. It's what is the actual cost benefit analysis of rewriting this particular portion of the application? Is it better or worse than rewriting another portion of the application? So I think that is a huge takeaway. The other thing that I always go back to in my mind, I was listening to an interview with Chris Coyier. He's the founder of, or the co-founder of, what the heck is that? It's so embarrassing. CodePen. He's a co-founder of CodePen, which is kind of an online playground for people developing CSS and JavaScript examples. And he did a 10-year reflection show with his co-founder about what are the big lessons that they learned over the last 10 years. And one of the things that they brought up, which really just hit home for me, was if you're going to rewrite something, don't also reinvent it. And I think the example that they had was sending emails. They wanted to try to rebuild, I think, from Ruby to Golang, their email sending service. And he's like, we already know how email sending works. We already know how all the logic works. Really, all we want to do is lift and shift the logic from the Ruby to the Golang runtime. They said we didn't want to change anything else about how this service runs, because we can't be learning two things at one time. We can't be both learning the new technology and learning how the new system should work. We had to keep one of those constants. And I know that people will disagree with some of that, but I think that is such a powerful way to think about rebuilding. Like you wouldn't, so you're in the hardware side of the world, right? If I'm going to say stuff that I don't actually understand here, but like if you had to replace the switches in your network, you wouldn't also want to completely rework the entire networking system at the same time. You're like, no, let me just swap, this brand switch box with another brand. Like we don't want to fundamentally change the way networking works at the same time.
It's very similar to development. You want to change one thing, because then if it breaks, it's that thing.
Right.
If you do two things, it's like, okay, it could be communication between them. It could be one thing. It could be the other thing. Any number of things.
And, people often underestimate all of the weird little edge cases that you had to account for along the way as you're developing a product. If you've been working on the same product for 5, 6, 7 years, there's so much weird little stuff that's baked into edges of the code. And the idea that you're going to rewrite this product in a new language, evolve the way it works, and completely change the technology, like stuff is just going to fall through the cracks. And you're not going to know about it until a customer who doesn't see any of this magical technology changing from their perspective. It's all the same product. And they just see that, hey, this used to work and now it doesn't work anymore. What gives? And you never want to put your team in that kind of a position.
Oh, interesting piece on that. So we kind of went on a tangent here. We were going into.
It's my specialty. That's why I get paid the big bucks.
It's kind of what you and I talked about for doing this is it's therapeutic for us to kind of get stuff off our chest, talk about life in general, but also other people. People are going through this. They're looking at, should I make a change or not? And it's some valuable experience that you have because you went through that. And 4-year doesn't sound like a pain-free experience.
It feels like, have you ever seen the meme where it's, should you use duct tape or WD-40?
No.
It's like, it's a great meme. It's a really simple flow chart. And it's like, does it move? Yes. No, duct tape. Does it move? Yes. Like,
I have seen that. Yes.
Yeah. It's almost like there should just be a simple, I'm thinking of rewriting in a new technology. Should I? No. There's your flow chart.
There are cases where it does make sense. If for some reason there's a limitation, like I would say if you're going into it and you're like, okay, you know what, we want to get somewhere and we can't get there with whatever, not saying that you can't get there with ColdFusion, but whatever technology there is, if you can't get to where you want to go, then, or if you're like, okay, for me to do it in whatever language or whatever technology, it's going to take me this long. But in this other one, like people talk about how ColdFusion is designed for rapid application development. So if someone were to say, hey, look, we need to get from A to B, we only have 6 months to get there. I can't do that in this other language. I actually need to switch to ColdFusion because I can do that. I can do a rewrite in something. And so you may, and so it'd be worth the exploration. But do the actual, don't just do it for, you think it's good, but sit down with Excel, amazing tool, and do your financial analysis and say, hey,
Excel is amazing.
Or Google with Sheets. Yeah, Google Sheet, whatever your thing is. If you
we're not judging.
There's some Mac numbers, I guess, if it's on Mac or whatever. I think it's what's called my phone. I don't know.
I think so, yeah. Which is just it's a weird application. Numbers.
People probably just call it Excel on Google. You know Google's Excel.
Yeah,
it's kind of Q-tips. But yeah, Excel and put and do it to say, hey, look, what's this going to cost me? What's this going to cost me in time? How long did it take me to redo that amount of time? And look at that. Take a hard look at that opportunity cost to say, okay, hey, is it worth it for me to do this? Because and then figure out, okay, hey, what's then my return? Okay, where do I get to break even? Because of the fact that my next feature set, let's say, is going to take me 2 years in the other language, but in the new language or the new technology, it's going to take me 1 year. Okay, great. Now you're beginning to make up your time, and you're able to figure that out. So and think worst case scenario. Think through where your the risk analysis. Okay, what are the risks in doing this? How do I mitigate the risks? Think through the mitigation process ahead of time. Right. Find people like a Ben who've done that before. Say, Ben, what have you done? You know what? I need a consultant to help me through this. So that.
Well, and I think too, one of the best things that you can do, just going back to this idea of the strangler pattern, is figure out the things that are actually constraining you. It's easy to feel like, my team's not moving fast enough. We're not shipping enough. We're not closing tickets with enough velocity. But like, what is the actual thing that's holding you back? Is it everything, or is it just a particular part of the process? Is it a particular part of the architecture? And when we were sort of at peak microservice hype cycle a couple of years back, one of the things that people kept talking about was being able to scale things independently, whether it was, I have a RAM heavy kind of a workflow or I have a CPU heavy kind of workflow. And it's nice to be able to scale those things independently. And I'm 100% on board with that. what I found kind of in reflection and in experience is that a lot of stuff actually doesn't really need to scale independently. If you have a web app and you're serving, someone's clicking on a navigational element and it's serving up a new page, like all those pages are basically at the same order of magnitude of performance. But if you have to then start, say, generating a PDF report, like, okay, now we're in a different area of performance constraint. And if you want to start to explore bringing in a new technology for an area that's maybe actually a performance constraint, you could isolate it first. Generating PDFs inside of my main app, it's a problem. So, okay, let's isolate just the PDF generation. Don't change the way it works necessarily. Maybe just isolate it first, or maybe this is the time bring in ColdFusion technology, which obviously has a lot of native PDF generation functionality. Get it working, and then you can start to work on the performance. And it also gives you a containerization strategy that I can now start to scale independently. So I don't have to scale the entire application because PDF processing is intensive. I can scale just the PDF processing part. And I think to me, that feels like the best use of a microservices architecture, is to really isolate those pain points and not necessarily break everything up into little bitty services. That was, again, a mistake that we made, I think, at the company.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. Is if you're looking at, okay, do I need to, is performance an issue, or PDF creation, generation, bring in experts in other areas. So maybe you bring in an infrastructure expert to say, hey, can I change up the infrastructure? Can we do a proof of concept on doing this in a small scale to say, hey, we're going to move this to microservices from a monolithic architecture, or we're going to move it to, but talk to an expert to say, hey, what can we do to increase the performance of this one piece of it? They may have something off the wall that you had never thought of. And I would encourage you to go to someone who you may not have ever talked to before, or maybe just in some different environment, because they may have something that, again, a trick that in your world you've seen all the stuff. They may suggest something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's so interesting too, because in many ways, the web doesn't change that fast. It has a huge focus on backwards compatibility, as do many of the languages that run in the web sphere. ColdFusion, probably the code you wrote in CF6 probably still runs today on CF 2023, as very similar in many languages. But there's also stuff that changes very rapidly and evolves in leaps and bounds in certain ways. And a lot of your mental models can become outdated and you don't even realize that they are. And I was just not so long ago, I was in a conversation with a database guy, and I was saying how, I forget what it was. We were having some conversation about having to update. I think this was what someone was making fun of me because we were on MySQL 5.7 for a really long time, like years after I think 8 had been released.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, that's crazy. How are you not upgrading to the latest stuff all the time? And I was like, oh, with databases, it's really hard because you have to take the site down, you do backups, then you have to restore into the new versions. And he's like, no, that's not how it works anymore. He's like, they've completely separated the compute of the database from the storage. So you basically just turn the database off and then turn it back on with the new version and just reconnect the storage. And I'm like, that blew my mind. I mean, and that was a constraint that I had been operating under for years and years. And it turned out that constraint wasn't even relevant anymore. Which I don't know how you combat that other than to...
You spill water?
I spilled my pen jar. So okay. my mic, I'm yet to commit to any kind of a wireless headphone at work. And so I have a cord that actually connects to my Mac, and I have to sort of drape it over my pen holder so that it doesn't hit the keyboard.
You're on a Mac and you have not gone AirPods yet?
No. I tried for a bit, but they kept disconnecting and I had zero tolerance for it.
That is a problem with the wireless, is that they work until you really need them to work, and then you're like, they're not working.
So all to say, going back to this concept of outdated mental models, to me, that's a huge part why it's so fun to go to conferences like this is you get that exposure to people who are working in adjacent areas of the same field, and you're getting that influx of new thoughts and ideas, and you're realizing that, oh, okay, that doesn't matter anymore. This matters more than it used to. And that's really the huge value add of going to something like a CF Summit West, I think.
And for anyone who's not been who couldn't go to the summit, I encourage you to go. Even East often hosted by Carasoft nowadays. Great summit, and they kind of push it to be government focused, but it is. But if you're doing development, a lot of times you need the same stuff. So go to East. Or there's also a very active Slack community out there. So join the CF Slack community. You can, if your thing is Facebook. Also seeing some people posting on Facebook, not as much on the LinkedIn, but you can post stuff there. But just find your community if you want to, and people throw ideas out there, or problems out there, and other people chime in with their experience. And
listen to a podcast like this, whatever.
Yeah, who knows where we're going to end up. So if you have ideas, if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify or wherever, Apple, definitely add comments. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about.
Can I go off on a total random thing for a second? So I had this idea.
Yes.
All right, you're in the hosting business, and I am in.
Thank you for that plug.
I am in not the hosting business, and as much as I love ColdFusion, from a language perspective, I know very little about how ColdFusion servers actually work. I know bits and bobs, and I generally understand how request processing works. And I understand that the ColdFusion is on top of Java, and Java's sort of routed through this servlet situation. But that's where my information stops. And obviously, you guys specialize in the actual server parts of it and the managing ColdFusion. It's not just that managing the servers, but making sure ColdFusion is running properly, getting the backups, getting the updates in place. Yeah. And I had this thought, and maybe this is a terrible idea, and I'm just willing to throw terrible ideas out there. It would be great if there was some sort of a training program where you could handhold people through a learning about server management in an incremental, kind of going back to this strangler pattern, in an incremental way. So thinking about this big bang rewrite, if I were to go, say, from day one, I'm on managed hosting, I know very little about hosting, to day two being I'm hosting all of my own stuff, and I've got disaster recovery in place, and I've got backups working, and I've got load balancing working, I've got my firewall rules in place. That's a lot. I'm never going to do it. It's way too intimidating. But if there was a way for somebody like an XByte to say, okay, we'll do the managed hosting with you, and you can opt into this, I'll call it XByte University, where you're course one will be database backups, and we will work with you so that you feel empowered to understand how database backups work. And at the end of the course, you as the customer take over database backups. That's not going to be part of the thing we manage anymore. You're opting into learning more. Okay, well, what do we do after that? Okay, well, now we're going to learn about I don't know, monitoring and alerting. Okay, now you take this course, and at the end of that course, you as the customer are now responsible for understanding monitoring and alerting.
We would love that because there's less work for us to do. But to be honest, most people turn to us because they don't want to do that.
100%, and that's why I'm on managed hosting.
There's a magical unicorn of a customer. Developer who wants to learn infrastructure management. I'm
well, and I know that you guys are also focused mostly, I think, on the enterprise type of hosting, and that's 100%. That's not their core competency. Yeah. That's not their quote unquote differentiating factor in terms of business. So I totally get it. That's why it would be like how when Mongo 10 Gen or whatever Mongo used to be called, when they came out, they had their Mongo University to train people up on Mongo. But at the end of the day, I'm sure most of these people are still also using just Mongo Atlas and doing managed hosting for their databases. But
so we have learn.xbytecloud.com.
Oh, really?
Where we have our engineers what they'll do is they come up with an issue they fix regularly for customers. They will post to our learn section, hey, here's
Okay.
how you do XYZ. I think database backups is one of them.
Mhm.
It's funny you brought that up. We didn't plan this ahead of time.
No, I'm just throwing bad ideas out left and right. That's what I do. I'm a bad idea machine.
and then on our YouTube channel, Dakota, the CTO, he goes into troubleshooting. So he'll teach you how to do troubleshooting if like all of a sudden you're going to have to do resets on your server all the time.
Mhm.
Where do you start? Where are you going to go through that? I've also done a podcast with one of our other engineers where I forget now what the issue he was having, the customer's having, but it was something with the servers taking up resources and how he had to troubleshoot that and where we found the issue. Sometimes it's just giving more resources to CF, could be an easy one. There are any number of things, but definitely, I mean, we have that. But I think the enterprise, but even partners we have who do or developers, and they bring their customers onto our platform, they don't want to do that either. I mean, they're coming to us for that very thing.
100%. Maybe this is selfishly for me.
I mean, if you want to, we'll gladly train you if you want to take over the management of your server.
Because it's too scary, I think, you speaking for myself here, to take on the sum of it from the onset. So the idea in my mind, again, this is all just fantasy world, finding a way to incrementally take on responsibility and always have someone to call. Like, okay, I'm now managing database backups, but I'm seeing from the logs that a database backup hasn't run in 8 days. Like, that doesn't sound good. And because I'm still part of managed hosting, I can get on a call with someone, or you schedule a call with someone and be like, hey, can you help me figure out why this isn't working? Like, I want to manage it, but I'm stuck here, and it's great to have someone to call. I mean, that's the beauty of managed hosting.
Yeah.
Is that you have someone to call. That if you're so, completely solo hosting it on something like an Amazon EC2 or DigitalOcean Droplet, like when it goes wrong, you got Stack Overflow.
Yeah, exactly. Or
right?
ChatGPT.
Right. Yeah. Unless you're getting like a $50,000 a month support contract.
Yeah. And you're like, ChatGPT, well, how did this go wrong? And then it gives you like a half answer, and you try that, and then you end up Stack Overflow again.
That button doesn't exist. What are you talking about?
We can go on a whole nother topic on another day. We'll do AI.
Oh yeah, I've got rants.
on another day. It can be fun. I do use AI a lot. I'll save that for that show, though. I'll save that for that show.
Just because we are talking about CF Summit, there is something that I cannot let it go in my head. So the end of day one, there was a AI discussion panel with some CTOs and CEOs, and Brian Sappy ran it. It was really very interesting. And one of the things that this woman, she's a CEO of a company, said, I don't remember her name offhand, that her engineers are adrenaline junkies when it comes to AI, that they're super excited to be building all this new stuff because AI allows them to move so much faster, and it's going to break, and they accept that it's going to break, and that's part of the adrenaline. And it drives me crazy that this seems like an appealing way to exist. And I'm looking at Xbyte here as a hardware company. I'm like, oh my God, could you imagine ever referring to your like network people as adrenaline junkies? like, oh, that's definitely not the people you want on your network team. Oh yeah, we have to roll out a patch for all of our Windows servers. This is going to be amazing. We're just gonna do it. You're like, whoa, no,
no parachute.
Do not just
no parachute.
Yeah, so I don't know. It feels very weird to me, some of the mentality that the people in the AI space
save it for the show.
Yeah. Okay. I'm done.
For anyone with adrenaline junkies in any role, I'll give you one great expression: ready, shoot, aim.
I'll tell you, going back to hosting for a second, the first professional hosting company that I ever dealt with I don't even think they exist anymore. It was called hostmysite.com. I think they were eventually bought by hosting.com. They were who managed our early hosting back when we had a single server and then 2 servers and 3 servers. And I remember we had scheduled, I forget exactly what it was we needed to do. We needed to maybe migrate to a newer version of the database or something. Anyway, we had to schedule it for like 11 o'clock at night because it was going to have downtime. And I remember getting on the call, and it was me and the CEO on our side, and it was, I think, the CTO on their side, and it was a networking engineer and a database engineer. And it was so cool to be on that call. It was like, I made this as a dramatization, but it felt a little bit like being in the NASA control center. It was like, it was very clear who on the call was supposed to be talking. It was very clear what the next steps were. And it was this very orchestrated process of putting something new in place, confirming that it was working, confirming that the logs are showing that it's an all go. And it was just, I don't know. It was so professional in a way that I had not been used to being professional. It was just very cool. I know that sounds like super geeky to be like, how dramatically exciting was the server rollout?
So for the Expect Cloud team listening to this, you guys have a lot to live up to now. Ben just kind of put up. Okay, hey guys, here's how switchovers should work. That we need. It should be like NASA for people. So
it's what it felt like to me. You know, it was just very cool. I was contrasting that with this idea of adrenaline junkies. This was the hard opposite of the notion of an adrenaline junkie. This was calculated. This was calm. This was measured. It was I was very impressed. And I'm sure that's what Expite is like internally, obviously.
Oh, obviously. That's my almost 13-year-old say Avi. I don't even know if she says that anymore. I don't know.
Who's saying full words anymore?
Yeah.
That's so 2000 and late.
All right, well, Ben, I think we are approaching. It's been an hour. 50. I'm seeing the clock rolling here at 57 minutes. I think it may be time.
Let's do it.
To we don't even have an ending. So you can tell the prep we did for how we're gonna come out with a podcast. It's like, all right, the introduction, the Ben and Ryan show. So we'll just sign off, guys. Stay tuned. We have no idea where our therapy sessions will take us. But please join us on this ride. Maybe we'll bring you on. You can join in our therapy. We're open to that.
Absolutely.
We did hear that. I'll have to put it on the spot now that Charvi wants to come on here, the PM for Adobe ColdFusion.
What?
Yep, she wants to chat about the new features. So Ben will give her a chance to kind of to poke her and get features that he wants to see on the next CF version.
You know, in her presentation, she mentioned that she is a huge movie buff, so we better get some pop culture references as well.
Oh, we will. We'll have to prepare all that.
Yeah.
I'll start watching movies. I'll have my daughter. Fiona. I need you.
There you go.
You're my pop culture person. I need you on this podcast so that you can. I'll just have to say something to you. You mentioned that you give us pop culture. I'll have her in my ear. She can listen in and just call me up with something. So guys, stay tuned. We have no idea where we're going to take this thing. We're having fun. We'll keep putting this out for as long as we're having fun, and everyone's we're having fun, really.
Absolutely.
Whether or not you like it or not,
irrelevant.
Yeah, irrelevant. I mean, the three people who are gonna watch this. it'll be my mom.
Well, sir, I wish you luck in this oncoming hurricane, and hopefully no damage happens on your end.
Thank you. And I think I'll just go light production. I'm not even going to do any overproduction or post production on this. I'm just going to take this and put it out there in the world. So actually, the people listening to it will not know what's going to happen to me. You'll have to stay tuned to the next podcast. So there's a cliffhanger. If you want to know what happened to Ryan in the next few days, in the next week, So
Right.
when we open the next podcast, we say, "Hey, Ryan, what was your favorite part of last week?" If it was surviving the hurricane, but
It's
stay
a good
tuned.
bar. It's a good bar to
Stay
set.
tuned for next week's podcast. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we do. And we will see you again next time.
Catch you later.